think of Mrs. Doubtfire. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to Women That Shred. I have a very special guest, which I'm going to totally botch her last name, even though she just told me what it is. Michele Kryczkowsk.
Good job. You nailed it.
Oh!
Great work.
Ding, 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 ding.
That's right.
Michele, hello. Welcome to the show. I know you had also just mentioned before that you've been on one other live, and that was actually a friend of mine. He and I used to host a show together, and I almost killed the guy, unfortunately. And I laugh about it because it's funny, but it's also not funny.
Yeah, we bonded over that, and it was
Yeah.
a good show. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's kind of funny about this particular show is that the topic is reinventing yourself. And, we all know people like Madonna, Lady Gaga, in the show business industry, they reinvent themselves all the time. So in honor of the show, I wore a Madonna t-shirt. I have to wear a Madonna t-shirt, which is also really cool, being that she just announced that she's going back on tour, and she's like in her 60s, right? Like mid 60s already. She looks a little rough, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, so Shred is a fan. Adele's a huge fan of Madonna. Yeah, so Madonna Queen. But yeah, I think a lot of people were really intrigued by the conversation that we were going to have. I'm actually kind of like excited about it because there's some things that I was thinking about when it came to reinventing and what that means for someone like yourself who now is in an open to work category. It's like, all right, I feel like it lends to it, right? Sometimes when these type of things happen, you think like, do I need to kind of reinvent myself? Do I need to do something different? So I'm excited.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think the Madonna reference was perfect. I think she's probably the queen of reinventing herself, trying new things, and does not care what anyone thinks. And I think that's a perfect recipe for some of us, and we can take some hints and pieces of what she does and apply it to our own lives. So I thought it would be a great topic to discuss today, and I'm super excited to talk about it.
Yeah. So you had mentioned when we were trying to come up with a topic to talk about that you essentially reinvented yourself. You said, I think it was like 2009. Is that the year that you gave me? Okay.
Yeah, it was a period. It probably was more like a period of a year's time frame between 2008, 2009, when everything just sort of, fell, the floor fell, right, from mortgage and everywhere else. It was an interesting time. I actually was processing for a broker shop in Michigan. And my husband was in the automotive industry. So I always joke that we were a career match made in not heaven. And so, there was a lot of change going on at that moment. And so I had to take what I could find. He was laid off. I was laid off.
Oh, wow.
And so I just had to take what I could find. And so that really, I feel like I'm pretty resilient anyways and have a lot of grit and determination, but that was very much a pivotal moment in my life. And I took a call center job at a bank, and that was the only thing I could find. I probably made half the amount of money that I was making at the time prior to processing, or when I was processing, excuse me. And what it did for me though was I met a lot of people. So I was still networking back in that day too, who just really sort of gave me some good advice. And I actually transferred from the call center. They shut the call center down and they opened a loss mit group. And so all of us that were in the call center, we actually had to transition to loss mit underwriting, which fortunately I had been processing. Mm-hmm. So I knew what I was doing. But it gave me a whole new level of respect for people that are struggling going through the loss mit underwriting piece. Because those people are, really in dire straits, right? And so you kind of put things into perspective in that moment. But what I did was, in that, when I was a loss fund underwriter, is I just thought, I can't do this forever. I need to figure something out. So I scrapped that plan. I quit my job with no other plans. I didn't have unemployment because I quit. And I just went with a gut feeling. And I think a lot of us are talking about gut feelings right now and what's the next right move. So I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to talk about this. And I do think that you should lean on your gut feelings a lot, but with data and facts and intuition is one thing. But one thing we did was I really backed up my plan, and we sold our house. We left Michigan. Sadly, we loved it, but we left and we picked up and we moved to Texas. I had no job lined up. But that's where I backed it up with data and facts. I knew the economy was thriving here. We did a lot of research for, tax purposes, property value, et cetera. And then of course it's a mortgage hub. So it was kind of like, it just felt right. Everything felt right. And so 30 days, I found a job after moving. And of course I had planned to save. So that's where, again, I sort of put some of my plan into action there, and really plan for those risky things. But, I think without risk does not come reward. And so I'm Midwestern through and through. And so I'm a really hard worker. And I always feel like no matter what, that will get me through. And so, I think there's a lot to be said for taking a bet on yourself, taking a chance on yourself. You can do it, whatever that is. And then just redefining what that means for you. Obviously, mine was drastic. That's a drastic example. But I felt like if I shared that story, then I feel like other people can that'll inspire other people to think about their situation, things that they can do to reinvent themselves, and just really make a plan in this environment. It's tricky out there right now. So you really have to be thinking about, what you can do to better yourself, your situation. I don't lack fear. Someone said, I think you lack fear, and that will be your catapult for success.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about this, but I don't think I'm fearless. I think that I'm risk adverse.
Someone,
plan,
yeah, no, I like that, risk adverse, and you said fearless, and it was interesting because I was at like a storyteller event with these ladies, and there was a woman that spoke about her story. And her story, she had cancer. She just went through so much, and she was saying how she doesn't like the word fearless, because fearless means that there's no fear in there. And she goes, in order, there has to be some level of fear in you, because that fear fuels, kind of essentially that drive, that fire to succeed or to do something, right? So I like that she just was like, can we not use the word fearless, please? Because fearless, that doesn't help, because there's always going to be some level of fear. And
right.
And it's one of those things where it's interesting too, because a lot of people tell me God, you have no fear, you're so bold, you're so gutsy, all of these things. And I believe that's true, but it took a lot of risk taking, and it took a lot of reinventing and doing all of those things to get to the level where I feel like I am bold, gutsy. So do you feel the same way? Like you basically had to go through a lot in order to be able to do that? I feel like that's necessary. It's like a process, right?
It is a process. And I think, it may be perceived as fearless, but it's really just grit and determination.
Yeah.
And really, even for example, I thought about something funny too that I'll share, which is, really if I set my mind on something that I'm going to do it, it's just gonna happen. Even as far as bringing an animal into the house, for example, I wanted to get a cat. my husband was like, we're not getting a cat. And so I've thought about it and I'm like, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to go and, during COVID, like everybody else got an animal. And, I made a arguable list of why, it was the right thing to do. Like, and I'm just going to do it. And it's down to that basic level of, I just think, whatever you want to achieve within your wheelhouse, you have to think about what's the right move for yourself. Really back up your intuition and your gut check, right, with data and facts, and just be bold about what you can do. I also don't really like to set limits on things. So I was curious about your perspective of this too. And it actually, a CEO I was talking to within the last few years said something like, okay, well, if you achieve this level, right? If you achieve your goal of doing X, then what? And it really got me thinking like, well, I think they're right. Like, then what? And I think, instead of turning towards, gut and intuition and data towards goals, I also look at it as turning gut, intuition, and data towards actually, like, I don't even know how to say it, not intentions, let's say that way, versus goals. So being more intentional about the things that you do and working hard for it. Goal is just like a byproduct of that. Mm-hmm. I think is how I've thought about that once that person said that to me, because goals once you achieve them, and it's like, then what, So I think you sort of almost limit yourself to some degree, because what if you could do more? What if you can achieve more and do more, and you just set your goals short too? So that's where I think the drive, the intuition, and everything else really come into play to propel you forward. So do you set goals for yourself? I was curious about that.
I don't. I'm that person that doesn't like have any resolutions. I don't ever have a business plan. I don't have a plan for my year. I don't know what it is about me, but I thrive on the spontaneity and not knowing what's going to happen next. Like, that to me is almost my dopamine. I don't know, like just not knowing,
Mm-hmm.
and just that kind of level of just being curious. For me, that's just how I function. And I think for so many years I thought there was something wrong with me. Like, oh, am I a lazy person? And am I not goal oriented? What does that mean about myself? Does that mean that I have no drive? Does that mean that I don't care about what I do in my life? All of those things, but I realized that I just function in a different level and I just kind of maneuver and navigate the world differently. And that's okay, right? And I think that's something where, like, when we talk about reinventing yourself, I think a lot of people, myself included, would love to reinvent myself even more so. But I sometimes worry about, like, how is that going to affect the people around me?
Sure.
Like, how is that going to affect my kids? Because my kids are used to a certain mom or a certain person, right? And so it's like, but I also want to be able to grow in a certain way. And that might mean doing things differently, maybe dressing a little bit differently. Like, I find myself too that, like, my style tends to, like, I have a certain style, but I've stayed away from it because I'm worried about, like, what people are going to think. Like, it's crazy. So a lot has to do with that, like the outside world. And so that was something I wanted to ask you, that, like, do you kind of sometimes hold back on that part, on that level, because of what maybe your husband be like, Michelle, that's so not you. Because my ex-husband used to say that all the time. And I'm like, what do you mean it's not me? Or that's not like me? Like, what does that mean? Well,
and I think, I think there's an evolution. I think you evolve as a person. So I think reinventing and evolution as yourself, because every year that we get older, our opinions change on things, or our perspective changes on things. And so I think that's natural. And so I think kids, it's probably healthy for them to see that, just my opinion. And kids are super resilient. They might remember things forever and, bring it up and give it to you,
Oh, they do. My kids are almost
they
22 and
do.
19. So they're
They
at the
all
ages
do.
where they like definitely like throw things in my face all the time.
They do. But I think it's important for them to see and us to use ourselves as a better, what better example than their parent. Just growing and changing and, being comfortable in who they are. And regardless if that's in how you dress or your career, I mean, there's a lot of things that I've talked to my kids about too during this transition, right? Like, what if we have to relocate? And what I've done is I've talked to them and I said, and it's only been a month, but I just said, hey, how would you feel if we had to move? Like, because I want their opinion too. I want,
Well, how old are they? Michelle,
their
how old are your
perspective.
kids?
So I actually have twins. They just turned 10.
Oh, okay.
And so, but that to me shows my openness, my resilience to them too, is, hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing. What do you think? Because they're equally as part of the family, of course, and part of the decision. And ultimately, of course, they're not going to be the end of they're not going to make the decision.
Right.
But it's important to include them in that. And, I think they are curious about what it would be like. I mean, that was their whole thought process is, I actually come from a lot of family members in the military. And so they see them moving around and they are like, well, I want to move, I want to do this. What would it be like to move?
Cool.
Yeah. And so, of course, there's fantasy of it and reality of it always. But, I think it's important to, really for me to get back to the point is just that I think it's important to include, people into your decisions, why you're doing certain things, but also being comfortable as yourself. There's nothing better as far as from an example perspective to give people. Of course, at work, there's just, there's only so much that you want to really show, right? Like, I'm not going to go to work, and talk to everybody about, maybe I want to dye my hair purple this weekend, and that's cool too. Like, if that's what you want to do, but that's not me. But if it was me, I probably would own it. Like,
oh, I definitely would. I mean, I'm the same.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people all the time, you can ask my boss, and my coworkers.
Yep.
They follow me on social media, so they see my personal life, they see all that. But when I come into this office, they realize I'm the exact same person. I've just done.
And that's how it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it should be. I mean, there's a lot of change that's going on in the workspace. I think us, for the last few years, seeing people at home in their home environment, realizing they're a person instead of just a coworker, has sort of shifted, the mindset of, how folks are dressing or what their hair looks like or, whatever, because ultimately none of that really matters as long as you're, the most important thing to me is loyal and honest and trustworthy as a coworker or peer or whatever. How you present yourself doesn't really matter to me. And, for what it's worth, I used to have all different color hair, like in high school, and I like punk rock music and rap music and folk music. I like all kinds of stuff. And so you just should be comfortable who you are. And, I think at the end of the day, you can't be afraid to take risks. Just like we were talking about before, and just to kind of come full circle too is, even in your appearance, if that's what you want to do and you're comfortable, take the risk. You can always change it. That's what I love about changing your look and reinventing yourself. You can always change it. You hate it, grow it out. You cut your hair short, grow it out.
Right. My hair was kind of my way to express myself, and knowing that like it'll come back, right? So like I was that person that always had different hairstyles. I mean, I remember my first like hairdresser, like professional hairdresser that I went to, I was like 9 years old. I don't know why my mom took me to him, but he was like local, and he was like, hey Raquel, can we like do one side short and the other side like a bob, because that's what's in right now, can we do this? And me, I was such like a perfect child where I was always like, yeah, sure. I never said no. So this guy would just like do all these crazy haircuts. And then I started dyeing my hair and it was like burgundy. But I realized that like it was really fun, but also like if I didn't like it, it was going to eventually grow back. And so that was like
Yeah.
my way of kind of like, taking risks and being kind of wild and crazy was with my hair.
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
like the opposite. But yeah, so like for me, I'm kind of in a place now where, before I did care so much about what people think. And like I said, I do care, but not as much. And as I get older, I'm realizing too, the more that I am comfortable in my own skin, the more that I'm just being me 100% all the time. It's amazing how many people are accepting me for who I am. I think a lot of times we fear, like, oh, are we going to be accepted if we're 100% true to who we are? And
Yep.
oddly enough, I actually have surprised myself and surprised in general being in the mortgage industry, being kind of the person that I am in this industry. I always thought, like, ooh, I might kind of be like a little bit of an outcast or a little bit of like, kind of a wild card, if you will. And it's been the opposite. If anything, everybody's kind of taken to the fact that like I'm willing to just be myself. And so it's like I've
Yep.
actually had gotten more respect for that. And that
Yep.
was something that I was actually surprised about. And so that's why I tell people all the time, like, oh my gosh, like you, like just be you and it'll shock you how you will have people, the right people gravitate towards you, the right people surround you. And that's what you want at the end of the day, having the right people in your circle
Yeah.
around you. I mean, even Suha's one of those people, right? Like Suha, when I first connected with her on LinkedIn, it was years ago when she had this persona on LinkedIn. And I myself was like, oh, someone like her, I don't know if we're going to be able to like connect and relate. But we lived in the same little town. So we ended up meeting for coffee and we've been really good friends ever since. Right. So it's like a lot of times we just are the ones that doubt ourselves and then we're the ones that get
For
it
sure.
caught in our head.
Well,
We're
and
the
that's why I
worst,
started with saying like self-limiting as far as goals are concerned.
yeah.
But it's also, it definitely translates into the thought process of what are other people going to think of, you and
Yeah.
your perception. And we do absolutely get in our own heads. And so I certainly think, and Suha said this good too in the comments, almost no decision is 100% final. And so, that's sort of how I feel about the moving thing too. It's like, it doesn't work out. Well, you just start over. So it's just, you figure something else out. You should have a plan B. Certainly, I'm definitely a planner, even though, I'm talking about like goals and I think it's kind of wishy-washy. But I do certainly, the finite items make goals as far as, things I want to accomplish. But bigger picture, I feel like it's limiting. And so I think if you are, very transparent about things that you want to achieve or people you want to help, impacts that you want to make at an organization or with people, then your goals just follow. I think it's just a follow up. And really, being a risk taker, investing in yourself to me is really important. No matter who you are, I think it's very important for you to invest in yourself, advocate for yourself. I think that's definitely something that's lacking a little bit. Certainly, like when I've talked to, either peers or folks that are on my team, how do I advocate for myself? How do I go get approval for this course? Or how do I, well, you don't know if it's going to get approved. What's the worst thing that can happen is they just say no. Some people are just instantly, again, self-limiting. And I would just really encourage, out of any sort of reinventing, reimagining yourself, put yourself out there, whether it's, via chat with a hiring manager or, chat with whomever, an executive leader at the organization to find out more about the company. And I think you'll be very surprised about how many responses you get versus no's. And even if you're not in, the open to work circle like me, and you're wanting to achieve something more, I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, budget's tight. We're in mortgage. We don't have the budget for that, but no one's asked. So that, again, you're already self-limiting before you even go ask. And so I just really would encourage, the ask. Really just put yourself out there and ask for what you want. Because a lot of the courses and things like that that people want to take, if it costs money, it not only benefits, sorry, mailman, and not only benefits you longer term, but much bigger picture. It impacts the organization, especially if you can articulate why you want that course, what benefit it's going to give to the organization, and just really sort of make a little mini business case for yourself. Again, back up your feelings with facts for sure. Yeah. And I think, it's really helpful.
You can tell you're an ops person.
I know, right?
And here I'm like on the marketing social media side, I'm like, oh, spontaneity, and I have no plan. No.
Yes. I like to try to see how things are going to shake end to end, yeah. Right? But still I love to pilot things and pulse check things that are very new and shiny and exciting, though, too. From the marketing side, I love that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, speaking of marketing, I mean, you're doing a really good job of marketing yourself. I mean, talk about kind of doing things differently and getting outside of your comfort zone. I mean, you started doing videos on LinkedIn for the very first time. This is the second live now. And that's what I love about you, is that you're just like, okay, you know what? I got to like do something different. I got to, step outside of myself here if I want to be able to find something, a job. So let me go ahead and do this. And you're doing it so well. Like, I'm sure every single person that has seen your video or have, seen you on a live, like, has probably said the same thing I have. Like, what do you mean she's just now putting herself out there? Like, you are definitely a natural. So I was like super shocked. I was like,
well, thanks. Well, it's funny because I've watched folks' videos. I've watched your videos in the past, and Delilah and Suha and others and stuff. And I think from an operations perspective, it's really hard to make content because you don't want to give away the secret sauce of what you're doing, right? You don't want people to, it's what we do is hard. It's like, I always describe it as you're the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. Like, there's like this big green projection of you, but nobody knows what's really happening behind the curtain. You're pushing all these buttons and making things happen. And so, I think it just was really relevant. The timing was right to put content out there. And I just want to help other people, because I think, if I can help other people out of this, then it makes me feel like I've, made a difference. And I think there's so many people. I hope so. And I think there's so many people that I've worked with that are just in this unfortunate situation, and it's nothing that they did. They didn't do anything wrong. It's a byproduct of, what we do for a living. And we're in a very cyclical industry. So don't forget, it's not you, and, believe in yourself and take risks on yourself. And don't forget to keep asking, for what you want. And, the sky's the limit, if that.
No, I feel like you getting on camera and doing this is going to open up so many doors that I truly believe wouldn't be opening for you if you didn't start doing this. Like, I truly believe it, because there's something to be said when you see behind the curtain, like, and I always reference Wizard of Oz, like during COVID, where it was this thing where all these CEOs, all these people could basically hide behind like the camera and those cars and the hotels and the travel. And then once COVID hit, it's like, you cannot hide. Like, we all know that you can't be out, doing the trips and the this and that, because nobody else is doing it. So it's like the curtain had to, come open, and people were just like, oh gosh, I'm being exposed. And so I love that you're essentially like, you are the Oz, like, you just exposed yourself to the world. And I think everyone's like really just pleasantly surprised. And they're like, wow, look at this person that like we didn't know about. And so I think like that's the beauty of all of this, is like, this is literally like an evolution for you that's literally happening in the moment.
Yep, for sure. And I'm super grateful and thankful, for every opportunity. I think no matter what, I have taken something away and learned something. And I try really hard not to look back. I mean, I look back at lessons and I think, and I apply that to the future. That's really how I look back. But, I would absolutely encourage people to make a video. I think, especially if you're trying to reinvent yourself and break into a new industry, I think if you're reinventing yourself in that way, it's really going to be impactful for the next hiring managers to know who you are, how you communicate, what strengths you have, and just would really encourage you to get out there and put out even a 2-minute video.
No, that's awesome. Well, Michele, we've already hit the 30-minute mark. So if I'm assuming if people want to reach out to you for any advice or any, help, they can. So what's the best way
Absolutely.
to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, make sure to do that. Message me on LinkedIn. And then if, conversations need to happen in another forum, I'll communicate from there. So happy to take any direct messages anytime. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, well, thanks for those that popped in. Christina, Suha, Shari. Is it Shari? Sherry? Shari?
I think Sherry, yes.
Sherry, I know. Sorry, because of the spelling, But thank you to everyone who popped in. For those that are going to pop in for the replay, always appreciate all of you. Thanks again, Michele. And I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their week.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much and enjoy your